we've got a really cool show planned today. We're going to be doing a garden makeover, and we're hoping to inspire some young minds and maybe even get some free labor too. We're putting in some... I'm trying to shoot the opening of a TV show. It'll just take a second. Like I said, we're putting in some raised beds and putting in plants from all over the world. Coming up on Down to Earth next.
That's really cool. Okay, Tommy, I have to move this. You're interrupting.
Uh-oh, I think I'm in trouble. Welcome to Down to Earth. Well, you might be able to tell we're working in a children's garden today. We're out here at Birney Elementary in University Heights, and we've got this big long bed to work on, so it's going to take a couple of days. It's probably 240 feet long or so, 11 feet wide, and we're going to be putting in some raised vegetable beds right here, which is why we're sort of clearing this area. And then the rest of the garden is going to be nature paths. So we're going to put in lots of educational stuff for the kids, and I think it's really going to be kind of cool because we really have to teach this stuff to the children so we know about conservation and the environment for the future. But first, let's take a look back and see where all this garden started. As with many school gardens, the space here at Birney was started up a few years ago only to fall into neglect as the school focused on raising test scores for reading, writing, and math. But integrating gardens into the curriculum is catching back on, and the school PTA here has adopted this garden to make sure it stays on track. Back in January, they had a weekend work party to get it ready for us. As you can see, besides the odd planter box, the garden was mostly one long pittosporum hedge, not the most inspiring of landscapes for children. But there were some nice mature trees, and most of these will serve as good anchors for the new garden. The crew dug out the old shrubs, removed weeds, and even found a few miscellaneous items that had been deposited over the years. They also mixed in a couple truckloads of compost thanks to the San Diego Permaculture Center. In all, they gave us a nice blank slate for us to work our magic. So what's the plan? Well, with such a long, thin footprint, this garden practically screams long winding path to me. That says we're going to have a lot of variety. The design calls for two basic uses of the space. The first is a nature walk for the students to interact with various plants from around the world. Secondly, it gives them a place to plant and grow vegetables. We're dedicating the middle of the plot to a grouping of raised beds that's going to work like a charm. Now, while we're saying goodbye to this cherry laurel, since it's one of about 8 planted in this bed, not everything that we're clearing out of this middle area is heading for the compost pile. In fact, we have 2 young citrus trees that were really in need of some feeding, but we're going to save them, put them on a great feeding program, and use them elsewhere in the garden. There's also a couple of mature rosemary shrubs, and we're going to dig up and transplant those to the far west end, and they're going to give us some great instant mature color. With the area cleared, it's time to start laying out our raised beds. I always like to stake out a string outline first, and it really helps visualize the layout in full scale. If we need to make a change from the original plan, it's way easier to adjust a little pink string than to move a heavy wall. It also gives us great reference line to keep our beds level as we start building up. Then, we trench around the outline because we want the first layer of material to be slightly below the grade for stability. Since soil isn't the most even of surfaces, we're filling the trenches with decomposed granite and tamping it down firmly to create a really good solid footing for our walls. Well, with everything prepped, it's time to bring in our material of choice. And I know what you're thinking. Aren't raised beds supposed to be made out of wood? Well, yeah, usually, but we've gone with something a little bit different this time around. That's correct. Now, when we started designing this garden, we all thought that raised beds were going to be a great idea. A, because the soil is nice and fluffy and drains really well, and the height of the beds is going to be a really good access for the kids, and more importantly to the design, it's going to give a little bit of weight and architecture to this area because it's visible from the whole school. And even when vegetable beds are fallow, this garden is going to look nice because it has a little bit of weight. The real discussion began when it came to talk about what we were going to build the walls out of. My first pick would have been my old standby treated timbers. They're pretty affordable and they're easy to work with. But the parents of the school had some concerns over using treated timbers. Even though they're rated as safe to use for the kids, they didn't want to take any chances of chemicals leaking into the beds. So then we moved into some of the safer timbers, things like redwood and cedar. Now, in the old days, redwood and cedar used to last a really long time because they were made out of old growth trees and the dense hardwood part of the tree. These days, they're not as dense as they used to be, and they don't really last as long in the landscape application as they used to, maybe 5 to 7 years. We could also just use a standard fir timber, and they usually might last anywhere from 3 to 5 years in contact with the ground. So those were all kind of issues where we'd have to keep replacing them every 5 years or so. The real choice came down to using something that was like concrete or stone, and the big advantage here is even though it's a little bit more expensive than using the timbers, these guys are permanent. So 100 years from now, these beds are still going to be here. They're impervious to termites, there's no chemicals. They're also really easy to work with. The nice people at RCP actually gave us all of these at cost. These are some of the stacking molded concrete stones. This one is called Country Cottage, and it's one of the ones I like better. These guys have rough cuts on all the sides. They've got different angle cuts in them, and they just look a lot more like an old-fashioned cobble. So I think they kind of give the appearance more like an old castle than they do sort of a fake stack stone. So they're coming a long way with these guys. Now, if you have an unlimited budget, of course, you can always build these out of real stone too, and I think that would look great, but it would cost a lot more money. These guys are a lot more economical and a lot easier to work with. Now, building walls out of heavy concrete blocks isn't something we wanted the young students here at Birney Elementary helping us with. They'll be joining us when it's time to plant. But children elsewhere in the county are already busy with their established school gardens. And over the course of the show, we're going to show you a couple of standouts. Let's take you to the first one now, down on Imperial Beach. Looking at this garden today with all the flowers and activity, it's hard to believe that it used to be a barren patch of dry, hard dirt.
Actually, there wasn't a bug in the garden. This area had not even an ant. I'm serious, when we first started.
But now the Planet Earth Children's Garden at VIP Village is bursting with life.
There's approximately 700 kids that come here and their families, and many of them are in apartments or maybe trailers or places where they don't have access to where they could really become involved like they can in an area like this.
Thanks to Jenny's vision, the preschoolers get to spend at least 45 minutes a week planting, digging, and getting closer to nature in a series of raised beds packed with a mix of flowers, fruit, and vegetables. It provides a great learning experience that they can't get inside the classroom.
You know, children are active. These are 3 to 5-year-olds, so their attention spans are pretty quick. And then there's different learning styles. Some people are hands-on. They have to touch something, but the garden, it gives everything. All 5 senses are open, and it's 3-dimensional. It's just a fantastic outside classroom.
But the raised beds aren't the only elements to this garden, because when you're dealing with a group of curious preschoolers, you better have something else going on.
Once you plant seeds or plants, you can't just come the next week and rip it up. And so we were very aware that they were going to want to come out and still be active and, you know, do things. So the tools for digging, these kids are so serious. By the end of the year, there's usually trenches where they've been over here, and they trade out with each other, and they're going places, and they're getting dinosaur bones and everything else.
Another great addition to this garden that I really like is a pair of plastic barrels that the children use to fill up their watering cans. The kids just dunk and go, and it beats having the hose running the whole time. The children here really love their garden, and it's become an essential part of VIP Village in Imperial Beach.
It's a bounty of color at times. It really is. You just walk out here and you feel good. Okay.
Is this lunch? I thought this was being catered.
Dude, this is great. We got spaghetti and chicken McNuggets.
Bean burrito? Hey, dude, what is this?
Milk.
Milk? I thought it was supposed to come in a carton. Well, after a little lunch, it's back to the raised beds for us. The walls are coming together nicely despite the fact that Ted almost lost a finger. The different sized blocks here really make for a nice look. We've started digging out and filling the paths in the rest of the garden too. So the structure here is really starting to take shape.
What kinds of things do you want to see grown in our garden in order to make our spaghetti sauce?
Meanwhile, in one of the classrooms, the children are already deciding which vegetables they want to start growing in the garden. I wonder if any of them are writing down kohlrabi. It's one of my favorites. And in another class,
Okay, we could have a welcome sign.
the children are making some garden signs and checking